Good morning, everyone. My today's presentation will be on this wonderful research article titled as Gender Equality, Climate Change and Agriculture in the MENA Region, the Priorities and the Possibilities, written by our Professor Bipasha Baruah and Dina Najjar. Now, talking about the introduction to the MENA region, I hope all of you know about it, but for those who don't know, MENA stands for Middle East and North African Region. Now, it is the World Bank in its report 2021 categorized it as a belt of 21 countries ranging from Africa to the Middle East, as we can see over here. Now, moving ahead about the vulnerability of MENA region, now the temperatures are projected to rise by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius in this region, and the precipitation is supposed to decline about 10 to 30% by the year 2050, and this is according to the IPCC report of 2014. Now, the most important report which comes here is the World Bank's Turn Down the Heat report, and according to the World Bank's report, the crop yields of this MENA region could decrease up to 60% when we talk about the temperature rise to being 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, and the precipitation it can also decrease to about 60% if the temperature rises to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. And there are other projections with respect to the MENA countries. That is, it is projected to experience about 10 to 30% decrease in precipitation in the upcoming years. It is already one of the world's most water-stressed regions in the world, and the water scarcity is among the highest in the world. And this is the most important thing, that it is well established that poverty, along with socio-economic, cultural, and political marginalization cumulatively put the woman in a disadvantaged position, coping not only with different vulnerabilities, but with respect to vulnerabilities faced by the impacts of climate change. Now, the Gender Impact Platform, we have the CJAIR Gender Impact Platform of 2022, and this was done basically to map the climate, agriculture, and gender inequality hotspots to target the climate investments in certain regions. And that was also done in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. But the countries in MENA region also rank very high when it comes to climate, agriculture, and gender inequality hotspots being categorized. Egypt ranks 14, Syria 45, then we have Lebanon, Jordan appear among the top 75 hotspots when we talk about the climate change, agriculture, and gender impact. The research article also mentions about one of the most important and striking thing, which is the MENA paradox. And the MENA paradox refers to that the MENA region performs very well on health and education, with girls and women outperforming men and boys at all levels, but counterintuitively, it performs very poorly when it comes to the platforms like socio as well as economic as well as political participation. Only 18% of the women participate in the labor force in the MENA region, and the women tend to be employed in MENA region in a large number in the home-based jobs, the informal sectors, and this inequality puts the woman in a very vulnerable position vis-a-vis climate change, as well as which is further exacerbated by patriarchal governments, socio-political instability. Now, this research paper also focuses on what do we know, talking about women's invisibility in agriculture despite of their active participation. I hope this is not only true for the MENA region, but it's also true for Asia and some other parts of the world as well. So the women participation in the agriculture, although the agriculture sector is the largest employer of the women force, but their visibility becomes a bigger issue. There are some estimates which suggest that the national surveys, there might be 50% of the women in the agricultural sector, but they're not counted in the national surveys. Land privatization, loss of pasture land, migration have also contributed to the surge of women agricultural force. However, their contribution are often undervalued as well as undercounted. Now, the other thing is the case of unpaid labor on the family farms. If the women work on the family farm, their labor has been counted definitely as an unpaid labor, and they are often categorized as helpers, right? They're not categorized as workers, but they are categorized as helpers to the male dominant agricultural sector, which has definitely a very negative impact when it comes to women's rights their other entitlement. Now, the other thing is the migration as a livelihood strategy and women as the de facto farmers. Now, what has happened is that in the MENA region, the women's increased participation in agriculture can also be attributed to the out migration of the male population. Yes, the male population has been migrated to different parts, and climate change, globalization, and we can say political instability, population growth, all have led to the out migration of the male population, but leaving women to work on their respective farms, and as they have definitely limited migration opportunities. Now, the other term which was mentioned in this research article is the feminization of agriculture, and this talks about the climate change, globalization, as well as population growth. When the male worker out migrate, this leads to the phenomena of feminization of agriculture, and it has been said to be of two types. That is, first is the labor feminization, and the other one is the managerial feminization. When we talk about the labor feminization, it is where the women compensate for men's absence by increasing their farm work. But managerial feminization, but managerial feminization here talks about when the women are at the position of decision making. They have proper access to the resources for optimal agriculture productivity. Now, there are various researches in women's participation in agriculture in the MENA region are often considered as de facto farmers rather than the de jure farmers, limiting their ability to adapt and building resilience to climate change impact on agriculture. Now, I will be asking certain questions regarding this in the class, that in your countries, what do you think, which kind of feminization of agriculture is prevalent? Is it labor feminization, or is it the managerial feminization? And where do we all categorize women in your respective countries? They are de facto farmers or the de jure farmers. Now, moving ahead, we'll be talking about marginalization as well as exclusion from the land ownership. Well, definitely, as we said, the MENA paradox, there is a gap between education and income. Women are still facing significant discrimination when we talk about land property ownership worldwide. Now, in the MENA region, women have one of the most lowest rates of land ownership, with only 5% of their documented ownership. This marginalization also increases when their women are basically divorced, unmarried, as well as widowed. They become particularly more vulnerable. And the marginalization without equitable access to the land rights, women are unable to make any kind of a decision when it comes to the agricultural sector, hindering their ability to adapt and face the adverse impacts of the climate change. So again, the other important thing is they are having difficulties in accessing the markets, and there is definitely wage inequality as well as in the agriculture participation. But there are different gender norms and the cultural practices also in the MENA region, which try to exacerbate these challenges, as women have limited ownership and restricted ability when it comes to taking collateral loans from the banks as well. So that also becomes a bigger problem. Now, the other important thing is wage inequity in the agricultural labor. Well, there is definitely inequality when it comes to the agricultural wages. Male get more paid, the women are less paid, and it also happens in the MENA region that they face gender-based wage inequity, lower wages, as well as very different and difficult working conditions. Though there are national legislations, there are international legislations, but their enforcement becomes a bigger problem. Now, the other thing is how to enable, Yeah. So the other thing is the widespread evidence of sexual harassment when it comes to paid agriculture work. It's been widespread sexual harassment in the MENA sectors, affecting the women very disproportionately when it comes to seasonal as well as when they are being employed as the informal labor in the agriculture field, particularly the young unmarried women. They are vulnerable to sexual harassment from their supervisors or the male laborers. Now, this was all about what we know, But this research paper, Professor Bipasha Baruah mentions also about what we don't know. And the most important factor, which she says, is how best to enable women to gain legal and social recognition as farmers. Now, there is a lack of sex disaggregated data on the wages as well as the working condition of the MENA countries. And this makes it more challenging to understand and address the specific challenges which are being faced by the women laborers. Now, as we have already discussed, their contribution to agriculture sector is often undervalued and uncounted. Now, the other important thing is how to advocate for reform in the male biased inheritance practices for gender equality in land ownership. Now, this is a very important fact. According to the gender land statistics, which is available for 9 out of 53 African countries, they emphasize that there is virtually no data when it comes to the gender and land ownership for North African countries such as Morocco as well as Algeria. Sorry, I'm facing problems with this digital board, but this is the slide. And also advocating with respect to the gender equality in the land ownership requires more and more positive policy intervention, considering for women to be more advocating their own important rights. Now, the other important thing is research on how women's ownership on non-land based assets. Now, land assets, we know they don't have ownership, but there are non-land assets as well. For example, there are livestock, there are jewelries, private enterprises, as well as technologies. Now, future research is required over this topic, which can consider the different types of ownerships, including joint ownership, as well as validating women's role in agriculture, which are often seen as helpers rather than farmers. Now, the other important fact which was mentioned in this research article is how to enable them to have more assets in training. So, for the women in the MENA region, their training in agricultural sector holds the key for their sustainable future. Because, what has happened is that research is definitely needed to understand the documented women's participation in irrigation as well as, water management. Now, irrigation as well as water management sector is being categorized as a masculine sector, and which has its own different problems associated with it. Now, this sector being categorized as a masculine sector, but women are involved in irrigation, they don't get their say because they are involved as laborers, they are easily available. Men are definitely migrated, they're involved in this irrigation as well, but there are different factors, that the woman's contribution is not also recognized here. Now, other thing is identifying opportunities for climate resilient green agriculture. Now, this is more important because we need to explore opportunities for climate responsive green agriculture, such as drought resistant crops as well as livestock breeds. Further, this article mentions that efforts should be required to increase their visibility as well as the social acceptance of the woman. And also in the green agricultural field, it is important that the women come and participate in equality of terms when it comes to men, and also contribute to this green agricultural policy dialogue as well. Now, the next is how mechanization of agricultural sector can happen responsibly. So this has to happen responsibly, but there has to be a gradual process which has to be influenced by social, economic, as well as environmental factors, but it has to be a bottom-up approach considering all the local factors. But there are concerns. Yes, there are concerns when it talks about Egypt and Morocco with respect to their conservative societies. There is less access when it comes to training with respect to the women. The health implications are also to be considered because there are majority of the farmers, including the women, don't have a health insurance, and they are continuously in contact with the chemical fertilizers and the other stuff. Now, the other important thing which was mentioned is how to create and optimize livelihoods complementary with agriculture. Now, this talks about complementary to agriculture can be with respect to the diversification of agricultural sector. The women can increase and their participation in non-agricultural economic activities like agriculture processing, handicraft production, and marketing their goods and services. Now, this is also mentioned how best to organize and mobilize for the rights and entitlement of the women. Now, in the MENA region, what is problematic is that the cooperatives, the cooperatives are very low and they are uncommon. And when we compare it with South Asia, the cooperatives are there. So there has to be more cooperatives, and women having limited access to cooperatives and self-help groups can be problematic. So researchers needed to understand the experience of the cooperatives, as I said, in culturally comparable regions like the Asia, South Asia, to potentially replicate what can happen. And this can further have a positive impact on the women farmers in the MENA region. Now, this article also talks about research on the refugees in agriculture in MENA region. It also talks about better understanding of the youth perceptions and interest in agriculture, which is declining, and also talks about policy lessons learned from the global COVID experience. So these are some certain things which the article also talks about. And yeah, these are the recommendations for future research, in which it talks about to enable legal recognition of the woman when it comes to contribution to the agricultural sector, to introduce and expand the social protection programs, and also to conduct research. And as the MENA region is the home of one of the largest refugee populations, there has to be more research aimed at understanding what could be the challenges when we talk about the refugee farmers in this MENA regions. Now, these are certain recommendations. I would suggest all of you to please go through the required readings about these recommendations. And yeah, these are the questions which have to be discussed. That is, how is the situation of patriarchy in your particular country? How would you rate the patriarchy in the scale of 0 to 10? And what do you think can be the solution when we talk about patriarchal influence in the agricultural sector? The second question is that in your country, what kind of feminization of agriculture is prevalent? Is it labor or managerial? What are the pros and cons of feminization being a labor feminization or a managerial feminization? And where do you categorize women in your country, the women farmers in your country, a de facto farmers or a de jure farmers? And what are the factors which are hindering the visibility of the women in agriculture despite their active participation? Now, what could be the other factors apart from patriarchy and gender stereotypes? So these are the questions which we'll be discussing further. And yeah, thank you so much. But I will say that I've taken a quote from National Geographic, which says, if you teach a man to farm, his family will eat. And if you teach a woman to farm, the community will eat. And I will add to it that if you empower, enhance, and engage a woman in agriculture, in farming, she will feed the world. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.